Hello and welcome to Matcha Mornings, part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network. I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith, and I'm excited to dive deep on topics around holistic health, the power of food, hormone health, how the practices of yoga can impact our health and well-being, and much more. So grab your cup of tea, settle in, and let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Today on the podcast, I am going to be talking about my postpartum journey. So this is part 3 of a 4-part series that I'm doing on motherhood, the first 2 parts. If you haven't already listened, definitely go check them out. I talk about my pregnancy journey as well as my birth story, which is something that I've been excited to share for the last couple of months. And now I'm diving into postpartum. And so postpartum, it really kicks off once baby's born, but I actually want to back up a little bit and talk a little bit about preparing for postpartum, because I think that this is something that is not talked about enough in our society. I think we really should be doing a little bit more postpartum prep. We do so much prep for baby arriving in terms of getting car seats and strollers and cribs and bassinets and blankets and, cute little socks and hats and mittens and all the little outfits for the baby, plus all the other little things that they need. And we often don't think about ourselves and all the things that we're going to need after we give birth. And birth is pretty intense. It's pretty extreme and it's very hard on the body. And so I think that it's really important for us to prepare for that. So I mentioned these resources in one of the other episodes. I think it was in the pregnancy episode, because this was a big part of my pregnancy journey, was also preparing for postpartum. But 2 of the biggest resources that helped me are the books, The First 40 Days and The Fourth Trimester. So I would really recommend getting those before you give birth, checking them out and just getting a sense for, what everything is going to look like and how you can prepare to heal and take care of your body to the best of its ability. I was also really lucky because at the time that I was pregnant, I was also going through a level 1 Ayurveda course with Shakti School. And part of what we started talking about, I think it was near the end of 2021, like probably November, December, maybe January, but I think it was more like towards the late fall, early winter. We talked about pregnancy and we talked about postpartum and we talked about birth. And for me, this was very aligned with what's talked about in the first 40 days and the 4th trimester. Talked a lot about preparing food in advance, preparing your space, just how to prepare to be still, to not be super active, to not overdo it. And it was really helpful to have that in course format for me. So I had a lot of resources kind of going into my birth and into my postpartum period. And I'm so grateful that this is something that I spent a lot of time on, because I think it really benefited me and my healing. So essentially what the first 40 days and the 4th trimester talk about are the ideas that in our cultures in the past, we've always taken postpartum very seriously. So the idea of the first 40 days is that we're really not doing a lot for the first 40 days. So that's over a month. It's about 5.5 weeks after baby's born. And for a lot of people, this is like barely even what you get from maternity leave, depending on, where you're from and what your job is. And it's really a shame that we're not taking this time more seriously. So it's kind of like this idea where if you birth in a hospital, you get let out of the hospital maybe same day or maybe a day later or 2 days later. And you're expected to drive places for doctor's appointments and for checkups and all that type of thing. So you're, carrying baby in and out of the car, you're getting up and down. And this really goes against what was traditionally done in a lot of societies, where the mother stayed in bed, was kept very warm, was fed a lot of warm, moist foods, and just really taken care of for that first 40 days. And I know this is a little bit intimidating because when do we ever rest for 40 days? And I'll talk a little bit about what I did, but my intention going into postpartum was that I wanted to rest as much as possible for at least the first month. And then the 4th trimester talks a little bit more in detail about how there's this idea of 3 trimesters, baby's born, baby's here, and then we just don't really think of mom anymore. And the idea of 3 more months of actual healing. And again, I'll talk about my experience with the with the fourth trimester, but I really love Kimberly Ann Johnson's approach to this in terms of like, yeah, we can spend the first month just basically relaxing, lying in. We often get checked by our OBs or our midwives at 6 weeks where we're often cleared for a lot of activities, but what should we actually be doing, or how can we actually be taking care of our bodies during this time? And so before we dive into this a little bit deeper, I just want to remind everyone that I'm not a doctor or a midwife or an OBGYN or a doula or anything like that. I'm just a person who's had a baby and did a lot of research and has used my own experience to kind of figure out my own postpartum journey. So one of the things that I really loved about the first 40 days in the fourth trimester is they talk a lot about postpartum care starting before you have the baby. And so this was something that I took pretty seriously in terms of cooking and prepping a lot of food. So the main things that I cooked and prepped for us were soups and stew. So we had a variety of, chicken soup with some homemade broth, lots of veggies, spiced. I had some that had rice in them. I had some that had noodles in them, and others that had no sorts of grains in them. And I would say that what worked best for us was actually the ones with no grains in them. And then what my husband was able to do was just make a big batch of rice in the Instant Pot or a big batch of noodles and just add it in. I felt like the soups that I made with rice and noodles, they kind of disintegrated a lot when we were reheating them. They were still good. They were still fine. But I think if you're making soups, just make like, chicken, veggies, broth, and then add anything else that you want into it after. And then we also did stew. One of the things I talked about in my pregnancy episode was that I really started craving beef and stew kind of around like 32, 33 weeks of pregnancy. And we got into this routine of basically buying a roast once a week. And my husband would make this big roast and he'd take part of it after we'd had like a meal of roast and potatoes and veggies or whatever, and then turn it into a stew. And so as we were getting closer and closer to baby coming, we were doing that. And I think I mentioned this in my birth episode, but basically he'd actually cooked a roast the night that I went into labor. So the last meal I ate before I gave birth was actually a roast dinner. And so it was kind of perfect because it was super simple for him to just throw it in the Instant Pot. And then we had stew for a number of days. So we had a lot in our freezer. Unfortunately, we didn't have like a super, super big freezer. We basically just had like the type of fridge that has like the fridge on the bottom and the freezer on the top. I know I have a good girlfriend who ended up delivering her baby 8 days after me, and she had that same type of fridge, but then also a deep freeze. And so she was making things like curry and pasta sauce and just as much as she could to prep for meals so that once her husband went back to work as a teacher, there was a lot of stuff for him to just take. She didn't have to do any preparation for that. I'm really lucky that my husband works from home, so it wasn't a huge deal that we didn't have a huge freezer, but we basically stocked up as much as we could in the freezer. The other thing I made was some fat balls. And there's plenty of recipes for fat balls out there, so you can kind of just Google and choose one that sounds good for you. These are really great for pregnancy as well. But I got the recipe for the ones I used from that Ayurveda program that I'm in. And basically the idea is that you want good fats. So you want to be using something like coconut oil or coconut butter or tahini or some sort of nut butter or a mix of all of them, lots of seeds. And you basically just blend it all together and then put it into little balls and put it in the freezer. And these were the best in the middle of the night nursing snack. I had a ravenous appetite once my milk came in. And so these were literally like the best snack. I could just grab like 1, 2, maybe 3 of them and just eat them super quickly. The other thing that I made was lactation cookies. And again, I just Googled a recipe off of the internet. I honestly feel like these were kind of just like oatmeal cookies with some chocolate chips in them. But they also did have like brewer's yeast, and I guess oats are really good for lactation as well. These were super tasty. And again, these were a great nursing snack, something I could just munch on super quick. And then I also made muffins. I made a couple different versions of muffins. I think I made like chocolate chip and blueberry and also some banana muffins and whatnot. These were good, although because I'd frozen them, I had to kind of take them out and unthaw them. They were like a little bit more work. They weren't as quick as like just pop them in my mouth the way fat balls and lactation cookies were, but they were good to have on hand. Similarly, I made egg bites, so kind of like the ones like Starbucks has. So these are a great snack. I still make these quite a bit. And now that my baby's eating, she can eat them as well. But you can basically just put a bunch of veggies chopped up in them. You can add bacon if you want. You can add cheese. You just put like the eggs in and then cook them in the oven in like the egg tins or the muffin tins for like 20 minutes, and then they're good to go. And you can freeze them and they last for a while, and you can just take them out as you need them. Again, similar to the muffins, these take a little bit more prep because you can't just take them out and pop them in your mouth, but they are a really great kind of like lunch type snack. The other thing I stocked up on was tons of tea, tons of electrolytes. I wanted to have lots of electrolytes for birth, and wanted to have lots of like teas and whatnot. As I mentioned before, one of the big principles of postpartum healing from an Ayurvedic tradition, from a Chinese medicine tradition, is to keep nice and warm. So you want to have lots of different types of teas. And a couple of my favorites in postpartum were raspberry leaf. This was really great for early days when I had cramping and a lot of bleeding. And then also mother's milk tea. This is one I'm still taking because I'm still nursing my baby. It's something that I basically have pretty much every day. So these were kind of my go-to teas, but anything, non-caffeinated herbal, ginger, licorice, mint, chamomile, those are really great options. And in the end, we pretty much had enough food for both of us to eat. So my husband and I to both eat without much thought for pretty much a whole week. And it doesn't sound like very much, but when you think about 3 meals a day for 2 adults, one of which is like ravenous because they just gave birth and are making milk for a human, it's pretty good. So I felt like we did pretty good overall. And I was a little bit nervous because I just wasn't sure how things were going to go. But, while I was like sleeping in bed during the day, or while I was resting, my husband was able to get up and, do things around the house. So he was able to do some cooking and whatnot. So if you do have a partner that's in the picture, and especially if they have some time off work, then you can definitely, get some help that way. And I think we're really lucky because where we live in Mexico, it's super easy to get grocery delivery. We do most of our groceries via grocery delivery, and then also to get food off like Uber Eats and stuff like that. So we did have a lot of access to food, and we never really felt like, oh, it's just like really hard to eat right now. I do feel like in those first few days, it was just really nice not to have to think about anything and not really have to do anything other than like, okay, there's like soup on the menu. Okay, heating it up, bringing it to you. And one thing I will say is that I purchased one of those like wooden table trays where you can eat in bed. And this was super, super key, particularly for the first week. It was super helpful to have that so that I didn't really have to get up. And so basically all of this preparation beforehand, I started around Christmas time. So I was due at the beginning of February. And so right around Christmas time, I feel like was when my nesting kind of kicked in a kind of more extreme way. And I think that part of that was because it was like the holiday season. My husband had a bit of time off work. We were already doing things like making a big turkey for Christmas. I wanted to do some like Christmas baking, make some Christmas cookies. We made a batch of eggnog. We watched a lot of movies. We were kind of doing that whole thing anyways. And so that really kickstarted all of my preparation for postpartum. And so after I finished Christmas cookies, it was like, okay, now I'm making lactation cookies. Now I'm making fat balls. Now I'm making muffins. Now I'm making egg bites. And then for me, I decided to go on maternity leave at the beginning of January. So I had pretty much a month before baby came. Now, I talked about this in my pregnancy episode. Because I work for myself, it wasn't like I wasn't doing anything, but it was just that I'd passed off most of my timely tasks that had deadlines that needed to be done to other people who were covering me, et cetera, et cetera. And I was basically just like picking and choosing what I wanted to work on, what calls I took, just basically how I felt. So I was working very, very minimally at that point. So I had a lot of time to dive into this type of thing. And I'm actually not somebody who enjoys cooking that much. Cooking is not something that I normally do. My husband actually does most of the cooking in our family, but I really loved this kind of time of preparation. It was kind of nice to have these little projects. And of course I had a little to-do list. And so just ticking things off as I went. And the whole idea with this is that basically you don't have to leave the bed for the first few days. So I had lots of tea, lots of warm food, and just basically was served food in bed. And so for the first few days, my food looked like rice with broth and ghee. Ghee was super essential, with a lot of warm tea with every meal, tea in between meals, lots of lactation cookies and fat balls as snacks. And then I would do things like, eggs with maybe a bit of like buttery toast for breakfast, stew or something heartier for dinner. And that's basically how I ate for the first week and a half. I know a few days into my postpartum journey, I think the Super Bowl was happening maybe like 3 or 4 days after the baby was born. And my husband wanted to order in like some chicken wings. And I was like, oh, I just feel like my system cannot handle like spicy, greasy food right now. I just felt like light food. I felt like warm food. That's really what I wanted. So obviously trusting your instinct, but that warm, moist, good quality fatty food that's really dense in nutrients is going to be best for you in those early days. And so I want to talk about a few postpartum essentials for me. I think the number one thing on my list is padsicles. Anyone who's giving birth, I'm sure a friend or a blog post or something will tell you that these are essential. I had bought a big pack of like Costco pads, and I actually made my own. So I put some aloe and some witch hazel and some lavender essential oil on them. And then I just basically folded them back up and put them in a Ziploc bag. What I didn't realize is you can actually buy some really great brands of padsicles that are so much better than anything that's DIY. And so Freedom Mom has a really, really amazing padsicle. I ended up also buying like another brand that is here in Mexico from my midwife. So I had a couple packs of these thicker pads that basically you take them and you like bend them, crack them in the middle, and all of a sudden it becomes really icy. They're really great in the first few days because they're a lot thicker. You don't have to change them as often, and you basically get like ice on your lady bits once you change them. And that was super, super key for me. I paired these with a combination of adult diapers and disposable undies. I didn't really use the adult diapers for actually going to the bathroom. That wasn't something that I wanted to do. So disposable undies I think would have been fine, but I'd actually purchased both because I wasn't sure what I would want. Adult diapers were nice in the first few days just because I didn't have to worry about, leaking any types of fluids. I think one thing people don't tell you about postpartum is sort of similar to birth. It's like you just keep leaking fluids. So there's a lot of fluid that's coming out of your body during this time. And the adult diapers were really nice because I didn't have to worry about leaking. But basically I had the padsicles that were put in the adult diapers, and then the adult diapers were on me. And then I had these like puppy pads that I put on the bed. And so I basically kept that under me for the first couple of days when I was losing a lot of fluids, a lot of blood. And then I had warm, loose clothes. So I live in Mexico. I was living in an apartment that was quite warm. So basically just like a blanket over top of my adult diapers was good enough for me at that point. You can put some socks on though, or some really loose sweatpants. And then I had the like nursing tank tops with the built-in bras and just loose sweaters and stuff. And those nursing tops were so good in the early days. And I remember feeling like in those early days that I was never going to wear any other shirts ever again, and that I would need like a bazillion of these tank tops and whatnot. Life returns kind of back to normal. Now I just wear my normal clothes with a nursing bra, and it's super simple because breastfeeding is very routine for us at this point. But at that point, it's like everything's so new, everything's so uncomfortable. Having the tank tops and whatnot was really good. And I had a lot of like loose, comfy cotton undies and warm, loose clothes. So just make sure if you don't already have that in your wardrobe, that's something that can be really helpful. I think probably most of us have some like really quality, cotton granny panties that we like to hang out in our private moments, and then some oversized sweats and sweaters. But that stuff was super key for me. And then also having a peri bottle was amazing, especially because I had a tear and stitches. It was really key for me to not be wiping. Basically, my routine was when I went to the bathroom was, do my business, use the peri bottle. I always kept it, as full as I could, with warm water as much as I could. I often added witch hazel if if I had the ability to. So do some sprays and then take some wet wipes, do a quick pat. And then I would put either like witch hazel or calendula cream or some sort of herbal spray on the perineum stitch area. And this was super, super, super helpful. So I would say making sure that you've got wet wipes. You'll need them for the baby anyways. So these are really key. You can basically use the same ones. I got the water wipes because they don't have any added ingredients or chemicals or fragrances. And then, having witch hazel or some sort of herbal spray that's specifically for postpartum and for perineum healing. And then calendula cream. That was something that a good friend gifted me, and it was amazing. Somebody's given birth and knows what you need when they gift you that type of thing. And then for me, having some nipple cream was really good early on. It's not something I needed after the first couple of months once my body adjusts to breastfeeding, but at first it was just so painful. And so nipple cream and nipple guards were really key in the first couple of weeks and, even couple of months, I would say. So that's kind of my list of must-have essentials that I feel like don't skimp on these things, definitely make things a lot more comfortable. And leaning into the physical discomfort was something that was really hard for me. I think I knew that birth is, like a marathon. I knew that things were going to be intense, but I feel like there's so much preparation for the actual birth part of things that you don't think about how your body's going to feel after. And it's just such a strange experience because you immediately lose like the weight of the baby. For me, that was almost 10 pounds plus the placenta, plus the amniotic fluid, plus a lot of the like blood and fluids that are in there. And you're left with kind of this like little sort of strange belly that's still there. And I think what I didn't realize is just like how weak I would feel. So one thing that was really amazing about our experience was we had a home birth. We had really great midwife care. Our midwives came and checked on us like every day for basically the first week. But we were also able to get our pediatrician to come give the baby her first checkup. I think she was like 3 days old and she came to our house, which was really great. And then we were also able to get her initial blood work done. So we were able to get somebody to come to our house. We just paid a little bit more and people were able to come to us, which was really great. And for the blood work, one of us had to hold the baby. And so I was like, yeah, I'll hold her. I had her anyways. And I'm standing up and I'm just not realizing like how weak I am. I immediately feel like my back is taking so much of the work of holding the baby up because my core was still so weak because my abs hadn't closed and my pelvic floor was very, very weak. And I was like, oh man, like I can barely hold this like 10-pound baby without having like pain in my back. I think this was both shocking for me and also a reminder to me of like the work my body had done and just a reminder to rest a lot. And I think it's also one thing to remember is that this phase doesn't last forever. I think it's really easy to feel very foreign in your body and kind of feel like, oh my gosh, like, is this how I'm going to live going forward? No, things go back to a place of homeostasis. Things go back to a place of feeling normal. It's just like those first few days and weeks that are just super uncomfortable. And I remember in the first like few days, I wasn't really taking any medication or anything like that. Just feeling like, oh, my pelvic floor, like it feels so intense. Like it felt like I had pushed something really heavy out of me, which obviously I did. I pushed a baby out. And it just took a long time to feel like it kind of went back. Like even in the first couple of weeks, I just couldn't stand for very long. I felt like even after like the first month and stuff, like still like I could have used like a bra for my pelvic floor, which is obviously what the pelvic floor does, right? Like it holds all of that up and in place. And when it's been so stretched and used so much, it's just so weak, which is a reminder of how important it is to heal that type of stuff after birth. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, what I did and whatnot. So the next thing I want to dive into is just the like hormones that happen and what it's like waiting for milk to come in. Yeah, the hormones were crazy. I feel like I've never had so many hormonal ups and downs in my whole life. I've had, intense periods. I've had hormone dysregulation, especially when I was on birth control in my early 20s. I've felt kind of crazy from hormone stuff, but I don't think anything compares to like post-birth. I think there's just like so much that you're processing on top of what's happening physically. A baby's coming, but it's like you wait. And then all of a sudden, baby's here and things are super intense and different. And then on top of that, your body's trying to regulate life without a baby in it and make milk. And so those first couple of days were just really intense. I was really lucky because one of my two midwives was a lactation consultant. And so she came and checked us probably on like day 2 or day 3. And she's like, how is breastfeeding going? And I was like, it is really painful. Like basically, I was having to gear up to feed, and I was feeding every 2.5 to 3 hours. So every 2.5 to 3 hours, I'm like massaging my breasts and I'm putting music on so that I can relax and trying to get the baby on my boob. And it's like super painful. It felt like glass was like coming through my nipples. And then it felt like she wasn't getting very much. And I was just like, oh man, how do people do this for a year, 18 months, 2 years? It's just like really intense. And she's like, let me have a look. And so I put the baby on my boob and she's like, oh, let me just fix her mouth a little bit. And honestly, she just made these little adjustments with Lou's mouth, and it made a world of difference. So getting a lactation consultant to look at the latch, I think is just so key, especially if it's your first time breastfeeding and whatnot. I just had no idea what the experience was going to be like. And it's really easy to get discouraged and feel like, oh, this just isn't working, et cetera, et cetera. And she was so helpful. She also encouraged me to buy an electric pump to help with milk supply. I had bought a Haka and had been planning to just use that because I knew, I work from home and I'm not going to be working for the first little bit. So there's no need for me to be like pumping and getting the baby on a bottle, et cetera, et cetera. And so basically my plan was to just exclusively breastfeed, which is what I've done. But during those first couple of days, as I was waiting for my milk to come in, it was so helpful to use the electric pump just a little bit before she started feeding. It just kind of got things flowing a little bit better. And I remember the day that I put the pump on my boob and I was pumping and some milk was coming out and I was like, oh my God, I'm making milk. And I just started crying because it was just like such an intense emotional experience for me. And I had many moments like that. Like I had a moment where the baby got hiccups outside of the womb and I started crying because I was grieving the fact that she was like no longer in my belly anymore. And then also feeling bad that I felt that way. But, she used to hiccup a lot in the womb and I just loved those moments. And when she did it outside the womb, it was like, oh my gosh, she's like never going back in, and just had a moment to kind of grieve, that my pregnancy was over. I felt that way as my belly disappeared too. It was like, yeah, I'm so stoked to have my body back to myself. And I'm so stoked to have a waist again and to wear, so many of the clothes I hadn't worn for months and months. But I also loved my pregnant belly. And so there's just a little bit of moments like that where emotions hit really strong and you just kind of have to ride the waves of them. And eventually that normalizes too, which is great. And so in the beginning, I didn't have a lot of colostrum that I was making, and the baby was a little bit dehydrated. She had a little bit of kind of dark pee coming out, and she had a tiny little bit of jaundice or like yellow coloring. And so basically what we ended up doing was supplementing her with a tiny bit of formula. We just had a little, dropper that we just gave her maybe like a milliliter or a little bit after she ate, just to make sure that she was getting enough. And we only had to do that for maybe like 2, 3, 4 days. And after that, my milk was coming in strong and she was all good. We also did 20-minute sun baths for her every day. We had a really good area in our apartment where it got nice morning light, and we would just kind of put her out there, rotate her every 10 minutes and just give her a little bit of light. And within a couple of days, the yellow went away, her dehydration went away. And fortunately, nothing was super serious. And so the next thing I want to talk about is just kind of like the routine that we were in those first few days and whatnot. So it's kind of crazy. The baby sleeps around 20 hours per day, but needs to be woken to be fed every 3 hours. So you find your own rhythm with your partner. And basically we found a rhythm of, my husband was tracking everything. One of my good friends had suggested keeping a notebook. So we did that. We had a little baby Lou notebook. I later transitioned to an app called Huckleberry, which has a really great free option. And I really love that. That became a little bit easier for me once my husband went back to work. But basically, every 3 hours they need to eat, and the timer starts from the time they start eating. So say it was like 9 a.m., we would basically be like, okay, so she needs to eat at 9. We'll start prepping her around 8:40, 8:45. So our routine was, I get myself up in the bed, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually is a lot in those first few days, especially if you have any type of birth injury. So it was a lot for me to just like get myself propped up in bed, and we would get like the pillows right and get my birthing pillow, which was kind of essential in those days. And I would do some breast massage and just kind of get myself prepared for getting her fed. And while I was doing that, my husband was like, attempting to wake her up because newborns are super sleepy, and he would, change her diaper and give her a little cuddle and then pass her over to me. I would feed her. While I was feeding her, he would go, heat up my hot water bottle, make me a tea, maybe get me a little bit of a snack, maybe some fat balls or some cookies or maybe something bigger. And I would feed her. She was always like a pretty quick, efficient eater. I feel like she was generally feeding for like 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes. 30 minutes would be a long feed. So we didn't really have a baby that did like hours and hours of feeding, which I think was good for us, but every baby's obviously just different. So you just find the routine that works for you. And so, yeah, she would finish eating, and then I would do some burping. We would have some cuddles, and then we'd get her like, she was probably still sleeping, honestly. At this point, she was such a little sleepy gal when she first came out, which they all are. And then basically like put her back down, give her some cuddles. And then after I did that, it would be, maybe my husband would come and lie with her, and I'd be able to go do my own thing, like go to the bathroom, have a little snack, drink my tea, whatever it was. But I did try as much as possible to sleep with the baby. I think the thing that's really hard as an adult, and even an adult that's tired who's just given birth, is like you're so used to sleeping at night. And I think that that's what is most hard and disturbing. But we tried to basically do things where, I do a feed like maybe around 7 p.m. We would have dinner and then get a couple hours of sleep, or maybe a little bit of sleep before she needed to feed again around 10. And then, get up, feed her, go back to sleep. And then basically she'd just need to eat like at 1, 4, and then 7. So trying to just do like 2 night feeds in those early days. And I feel like that was really helpful. And especially in the early days where I had help from my husband. So he was able to get up, do the changing, et cetera, et cetera. But for us, it was really key to set alarms and to make sure we wrote everything down. Like, you just are so brain dead at the beginning that it's like even writing down which boob she fed off of, or when she pooed, or when she peed, and what that was like, et cetera, et cetera. So helpful. And I'm so grateful for a good friend of mine who recommended that, because it was such a game changer. All right, so we gave birth in Mexico, as you guys know, and we gave birth using a midwife. So we had really, really excellent support with her. Basically, my midwives, like I mentioned in the birth episode, were there until like 6 a.m. the day that she was born on February 10th. It was a Thursday. And then one of my midwives came back later that day. She did a routine check on the baby to make sure everything was all good. And then she also checked me just to see how things were healing, make sure there was no infection, et cetera, et cetera. And we basically had the midwives coming to our house every day for probably, 5 days to a week. And they would do checks for me to see how my stitches were healing, how I was doing, and check the baby. They gave us a recommendation for a pediatrician, and we were able to fortunately get her to come for that first visit, which was super great. I think the baby, like I said, was born on a Thursday, and I'm pretty sure the pediatrician came on like the Saturday. So once we had the pediatrician in order, the care actually got transferred for Lou to the doctor. So the doctor became kind of our point of contact. And basically my midwives came and took care of me, which was really great. And then, like I mentioned, we were also able to get her like initial blood work done at home. So we just paid a little bit more and we're able to do that. And it meant that we didn't leave the house for, I think it was like a good 11 days or 2 weeks, something like that. So it was really nice to have that first doctor's appointment and the first round of blood work just done right at home, and to have the midwives coming to our house during those first few days. It was just really nice because I didn't have to get dressed. I didn't have to do anything other than maybe walk from the bed to the living room. I didn't have to do stairs, anything like that. It was so, so nice. And one of the things that I really wanted to do was to consume my placenta. And so my midwife came, I think like 4 days after the baby was born. We'd basically taken the placenta and put it in the freezer, I think is what my husband did, and then took it out to like unthaw it when she was coming to get it. And so she cut off a part of it that my husband could like basically put into a smoothie and make like ice cubes out of, so I could consume a little bit of it raw while she was encapsulating the rest. And that was really amazing. I basically had once a day this like placenta smoothie, and I couldn't taste anything. It doesn't taste like anything in that form. You know, it was blended with like berries and almond milk and collagen, all these types of things. And so yeah, couldn't taste it. And then after, I think like 2 weeks, I got the capsules back for my placenta and was able to take those for the next couple of weeks. And I really feel like this was a game changer for my healing. It is something that I would absolutely do again if I was able to, assuming that there was no, medications or surgeries or anything that impacted the quality of the placenta. But this was something that I was really grateful to be able to do. And I know some people think it's kind of gross, but honestly, like I would crave those smoothies. I'd crave the pills. It's like my body knew that it needed those nutrients, which is super, super interesting and yeah, a little strange, but it worked for me. And then my husband was off for 3 weeks of work, which was so nice. Obviously, I wish he could have been off a little bit longer, but having those 3 weeks where he could help me was really good, especially because I had a tear and because I was really trying to stay in bed. It really meant that I didn't have to get up other than to go to the bathroom. So during those first couple of weeks, I really didn't do a lot. It was basically like I was in bed all day. I would get up to go to the bathroom. Sometimes I would get up and like move to the couch, and then I would, curl myself up on the couch and we'd kind of hang out there for a little bit. After the first first week, I started coming out a bit more so we could do dinners like in the living room at the table. And after the second week, I felt a lot better about doing that, but I really didn't walk around, move around, do a lot. And I just feel like this was so helpful for my healing to allow my body to just really, really heal itself and all that type of stuff. So yeah, just to summarize that, it's like basically the first week I lied horizontal, I ate warm foods, I stayed in bed, I stayed as warm as possible, just didn't move around. Second week, I started moving around the apartment more. And then, like I mentioned before, the first trip out of the house was around 10 days old. And that was actually for a newborn photo shoot. So probably something we actually didn't need to do, but something we wanted to do to kind of capture that moment. And then we went and got our first chiropractic adjustment at around 2 weeks old. And so I got one and the baby got one as well. We basically continued weekly adjustments for both me and baby since giving birth. And again, that's just another thing that I feel like was a bit of a game changer for us. In the third week, our parents arrived to come visit. So I was a bit more active, but really still wasn't leaving the apartment. I didn't really leave the apartment until around week 4. So had those 30 days where I was just not doing much. And I took my first walk around 4 weeks. So I really was just hanging out, not doing a lot. I did find around like 2 to 3 weeks that I started craving a little bit of movement. And so I kind of just tuned into what my body needed. I wanted to do a little bit of light stretching and movement and breath work. And I felt like this was very investigative for me in terms of like my body felt very foreign to me. And that was weird because I am somebody who is so in tune with my body. And normally I get up and I move. That's what I do in the morning. I get up, I stretch, I breathe, I meditate. That's like my routine. And so not having that was really strange. But when I say I started moving, it honestly started with, okay, I'm sitting on the side of the bed and I'm doing neck rolls, or I'm moving my arms in circles. And then it was like, okay, can I get up and down from the yoga mat? Okay, yeah, I can. Can I do some cat cows? How does this feel in my body? Stretching my wrists a little bit. Okay, I'm lying on my back, like breathing into my belly, breathing deep, breathing into my pelvic floor. How does that feel? And one of the things that I did pretty early on was I actually purchased this program by BirthFit. It's the Postpartum program. BirthFit is a program run by one of my best friend's cousins. And I did their prenatal program and it was really, really great. And so I decided to purchase their postpartum program as well. And the first 30 days is all about resting. It's called Lie-In. You start to stretch as you're ready, some abdominal massage and breath work, and then the program gets more intense from there. But the first 30 days is all about just basically like, lying down, starting to tune into your breath, massaging your belly, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was something that I really enjoyed doing. And the workouts get more intense from there. And I'm honestly still doing them, almost a year postpartum. So really, really great stuff there. And then one of the other things I did early on was I got some lymphatic drainage massages. I got 3 of those done when I was around probably 3 or 4 weeks postpartum. And I found somebody that could come to my house, which was really great. So again, I didn't have to leave. And it really helped with the puffiness and the excess fluid and just getting that kind of cleared out of the system. And that's one of the things is you've just got a lot of fluids in the system and there's a lot of air in the system from having your belly that's empty. And so I really, really loved doing that. And like I said, around 1 month, I started walking a bit more. It was very slow, not very far. I still found that even things like doing dishes were quite hard. My husband had taken over doing the dishes while he was off work, and then he continued supporting me with those for probably 6 to 8 weeks, just because we don't have a dishwasher here in Mexico. And so the dishes can take quite a while, at least 30 minutes, but probably closer to 45 or an hour. And I just felt like standing for that long was really hard for me. Like I mentioned, we had visitors in the 3rd and 4th week, and that was good, but it was definitely a lot. I think it was a lot while I was still going through the early hormones and emotions and trying to figure everything out. And I'm definitely somebody who likes to host people and make sure they're having fun. And I just didn't have capacity for any of that, which is totally fine. So I feel like there's pros and cons, because we don't live where our parents live. It was such a blessing to have them meet the baby early on, but it was also just a lot to have people in our space all the time and to feel like I needed to be on when I didn't really want to. And so, yeah, just something to consider if you're somebody who is having a baby and going to have people in your space. One of the things that I have continued to do, even though I'm, almost a year postpartum, and that I really continued to do after baby was born, was my prenatal vitamin. I just continued taking that. Also continued with vitamin D. And then I started a postnatal DHA. I'd been taking a prenatal one and I found a postnatal one that was really great. So just continuing to take in as much vitamins and nutrients as I could. And as I said, I had a huge appetite. So I really leaned into eating what I needed. If I was hungry, I ate. I didn't do any type of dieting or restricting or anything like that, which I think is really important in those first, few days, particularly weeks and even months as you're making milk and stuff. And it was such a surreal experience to watch my body shrink while eating more than I'd ever eaten before in my life. And yeah, that was a pretty strange experience for me. And so I want to continue on just sharing over the last couple of months with what postpartum has been. And so around 6 weeks, I started working with a physiotherapist to help with my pelvic floor. And we started doing something called hipopresivos. I actually have no idea if there's an English word for this, but it was basically working with the breath and working with the core. And this was really to help my diastasis recti heal. If you have that, it's really good to be checked by somebody who is a professional who can help you make sure that that's sealed before you get into any more intense exercise. And so because my belly was so big, my baby was so big, I had, a couple of centimeters of the split in my abs. And so the hipopresivos really helped with that. It was something that really helped heal. And then the physiotherapist really helped me work on breath work and engaging with my pelvic floor again and starting to use that. And so I went once a week for I think 5 or 6 weeks, and that was really great. And then around 7 weeks, I got checked by my midwife. My stitches had mostly healed and everything was good, but I didn't really feel ready for any of the things that they kind of clear you for. And my midwife is not the type of person who's like, yep, you're good, you're clear. She was like, how are you feeling? What do you feel like doing? If you don't feel like exercising yet, then don't do that. And I was like, yeah, no, I really don't feel ready for any of that stuff. I had been doing some small walks and started to be a bit more active. I'd started kind of re-engaging with the world, but was really not ready to be back in the gym or anything like that. And so I just really, really listened to that. And then around 2 months, I got a series of massages to help finish closing my abs and heal the diastasis. And we also did some belly binding with that. The belly binding was not my favorite. I didn't really like it. And especially because I had some hemorrhoids from giving birth, I feel like it didn't really suit me that much, but that's a personal preference. Some people really love it. And for me, I just found it very uncomfortable. But I really loved the massages. It was really nice to get body work done, especially early on, and to just, again, help my abs and encourage my abs to close up. And then around 3 months, I started acupuncture to help with my healing and hormone balancing. And that was amazing. And so basically the things I continued were bi-weekly acupuncture, weekly chiropractic adjustments, and then getting, massages as much as I could. And I found that I lost most of the baby weight within the first 2 to 3 weeks, but my body still looked really different. So that was something that was really strange. Like, a lot of my clothes were fitting again, but I still had, like my jean shorts, for example, my belly was still kind of too big and bloated for that. But it was strange to step on the scale and be like, oh, I'm weighing the same as I did before. And I felt like it took around 3 months before I was really starting to feel more like myself. That's when I was feeling more ready for bigger walks and starting to go back to the gym, and my body started to feel like home again. And I feel like that's when my body started measuring more around the way it was pre-pregnancy and stuff like that. So started looking and feeling more like I did before. And I'm really not into the idea of like getting our bodies back or anything like that. I don't think that our bodies can go back after growing a human and birthing a human. But at the same time, it is really nice to have a waist again and to have your clothes fit again and to feel like your body feels like your home. I feel like that was the biggest thing for me. I remember in those early days when I started, just doing neck rolls or breathing or feeling my belly or lying on my yoga mat or doing cat cows, like, will my body ever feel like my body ever again? And I mean, it started feeling like home again after 4 or 5, 6, 7 weeks, but I really feel like it was 3 months before I was like, okay, my body feels like my body again. So I think it's important to be patient with yourself. I mean, it takes 9, 10 months to grow the baby. And we kind of have this in 6 weeks, I need to bounce back and be doing everything I was pre-baby. That's really crazy to me. So at 4 months, I started working super part-time. I had basically backlogged everything and set everything up so that I had coverage with my business and the work that I do for 4 months. At 4 months, I felt like a little bit of an inkling to kind of be doing a little bit more, but I started really slow. I started around 5 hours a week. I had a nanny twice a week, so 10 hours of childcare, which was really helpful. And then I just basically amped it up by that from there. And around 7 months, I was working up to 20 hours a week with only 10 hours of childcare. And that felt like way too much. I just felt like I wasn't able to show up 100% for work and also 100% for the baby. And so basically from September on, I've just been working on scaling things back and heading into 2023, definitely made a lot of changes to work, let some clients go, stepped back from some things and just made some more permanent changes in terms of how I'm going to be moving forward. And I'm feeling 10, maybe max of 15 hours a week working on work and projects is what I can balance at this point. I just feel like for me, it's really important to be with my baby in these early days and spend as much, time as I can with her and enjoy, the time that I do have with her, while also being able to do things that benefit me or important to me, kind of keep me feeling like, Amanda and not just Baby Lou's mom. And so this has been a big topic for me. I think I'm going to go into this a little bit more in the next episode where I'll talk more about 1 year of motherhood, but just wanted to give a brief outline of okay, I had, I had 4 full months offline, 3 months of the baby, and then around 4 months started introducing things again. And if you know me, I feel like it's very typical that I would kind of jump in around 4 months and then around 7 months be like, oh, hit the brakes, got to back up a little bit. So we live and learn, and that was my learning. Things that I also did to support my postpartum, I did do some postpartum yoga with the same teacher who I did mom and baby or prenatal yoga with. I also did some mom and baby Pilates for a little bit, which was really great. Also did some mom and baby yoga. Any activities where you can get your baby involved and also be active are really awesome. I spent a lot of time walking. So that's been like kind of my main form of exercise is walking, getting outside, taking the baby outside, and then trying to get to the gym about 1 to 2 times per week. And now that I'm 11 months postpartum, I'm feeling pretty back to how I felt pre-baby. I think the only things that are still feeling a little bit tender are, I think my perineum's still doing a little bit of healing. You know, those tissues went through a lot with carrying the baby, birthing the baby, and then having a tear. And then hemorrhoids got me good. I know it's not like the most glamorous topic to talk about, but I had them a little bit at the end of pregnancy. I didn't really do anything about them because I kind of just figured they'd go away on their own. And then they've just taken ages and ages. So seen a specialist, done some work with some herbs, taken some medication, just waiting for my body to heal a little bit, and we'll just see how that goes. But those have been really my only complaints. And other than that, I feel like I'm pretty well back to physically how I was pre-baby, as much as you can considering. But I am very tired. So I feel like that would be the biggest thing that's been a change, is just like not being able to get complete full night's sleep, continuing to make milk, you know, balancing it all is just a lot of work. So yeah, I feel like being tired is really normal as a mom. I did get some blood work done probably around like 6 months postpartum, just to make sure that I didn't have any deficiencies. And, you know, I worked with my naturopath with that one, and she's like, nope, everything's good. You're just a tired mom. And I was like, okay, sounds good. So for that, I'm just doing things like, if I can nap with the baby, then I will take a nap. That's really helpful. Also just trying to go to bed earlier. You know, she wakes up pretty early. Like she's up by around like 6 or 7 a.m. And you know, once she's up, she's up. She doesn't really go back to sleep. She doesn't really sleep in. And so if I'm not going to bed till 11 and then I'm doing a feed in the night and maybe she's up another time or whatever, it's like I could be easily down to 5 hours of sleep, which is not really my vibe. I've definitely been more the person who likes like 8, even 9 hours of sleep. And I certainly have not been getting that for the last year. So just running on a little bit of low fumes, but if you have a baby, you know, it's definitely all worth it. And so just trying to do my best with that. So I think that wraps everything up. That's pretty thorough description of how things went postpartum. Hopefully this has been something that's interesting and helpful for anyone listening. If you've made it this long into the episode, then thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here. If you haven't listened to those other 2 episodes, definitely would go check them out. I think that they're pretty interesting, talking about pregnancy and birth and whatnot. And then this kind of rounds it out with the postpartum journey. And so in the next episode, which will be the last episode of this series, I'm just going to reflect on 1 year of motherhood. So I think that that's going to be a really fun episode as well. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you soon. Okay, bye. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Matcha Mornings. To find links mentioned in this episode, show notes, photos, and more, head on over to wanderbarn.com/podcast/matcha-mornings. To be the first to know about brand new episodes of Matcha Mornings, subscribe on your podcast app. If you enjoyed this episode of the show, please leave a review or send me an email at wanderbarn@gmail.com with the subject line Matcha Mornings. To follow along with me, Amanda Kingsmith, you can find me on Instagram at Amanda Kingsmith to learn more about other fun projects I'm working on. To find more great podcasts like this one on topics such as travel, the business of yoga, cryptocurrency, and more, head on over to wanderbarn.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon.